Hi, and welcome to a part 3 in a series about cutting and depression and some other related subjects or aspects to it. As I've covered some of these things that I will be talking about in this video in the previous part 1 and 2, but as that was a while ago and there is some of you who are new to my videos and my channel, or perhaps simply just want to hear me talk more about it, or that there were some things about myself or my experience with these things that I didn't cover in the previous videos, I will do my best to try to give or share some of my experiences in this video. And as always, if you have any additional further questions about anything that I'm talking about here, let me know in the comments. Your thoughts and questions and ideas are always welcome. So we can first start by something that to me personally is not connected to self-harm, but something I think I haven't been going through too much yet, at least, and that is around what age that I would consider myself becoming aware of depression in my life, as it has been like a base level of my consciousness and knowledge about myself, at least the past 2 decades or so. But I can't really remember any specific year that I started to feel depressed or sad or anything like that. To me, sadness is often just an emotion by itself and not too much of a connection to other states of mind or moods. Because to me, depression is more connected to anxiety and emptiness and like a involuntary, like forced nihilism, which is something that I otherwise don't have or feel, but anxiety and connected panic attacks kind of have a tendency to short circuit the self into or towards nihilism and create a false sense of self or reality. And in that case, one doesn't have to exclude the other. But another thing that has been my experience has been also to not be scared of it or distance myself from it too much, but to embrace it, especially the emptiness and the solitude. And I think that's one of the times in my youth when I started feeling like a lack of control, when I was socially distanced without myself taking that choice, but being forced to be alone. When, for example, different childhood friends decided that I wasn't either fun or just connected to something they wanted to do. It's started to become like more of a time-based or schedule-based thing, that for me to be able to be around some people, I would need to call them and make plans with them before some other people did, or I would simply be excluded from anything connected to those people. Which of course is on their part very childish, but that's how some kids are. At least from my experience. That there is always different social circles and so on. But that taught me an important lesson to not feel like a victim or that something is wrong with me just because I'm excluded and by myself, and to find joy and enjoyment in activities that I have to rely on myself to do. And that's when and where nature became a lot bigger part in my life, and when I started feeling a personal connection to the forest. And this was around like age 8, 9, 10, and it increased between the age of like 9 and 10. And I would just take long walks and explore different paths in the forest, either created by people or animals. That's very common in the forests around here and my parts of Sweden, in the West Gothic county. That there is many paths in the forest that the animals take so often that grooves start to form, and in some cases people also frequently walk some paths, that small roads or paths take form. And usually you have your path, what you consider a walk, but and you simply go from one path to another until you return somewhere close to where you started, and then return home or wherever you're going. But that's when I started exploring and wandering, and to dare myself to go in directions where I didn't know where I was going to end up. And that over time became simply larger walks, because when you start knowing more about a larger area, an expanding area, the first time you exit the forest, maybe between some fields or outside of some farm or a house or neighborhood or anything like that, you might not be completely sure where you are, but I have always known at what direction to walk to get back home or to where I started from. So that's when I started to implement that aspect into my wandering and my walks, to mentally map out different areas of different villages and cities that I was in. And that's something that I've done ever since, that I wherever I live, I start by exploring my surroundings and then expand that area to a bigger and bigger area. And by doing that, I not only have a natural form of spiritual sustenance and time to give myself physical exercise, but also it gives the mind time to immerse itself into deeper thought, and you over time find it easier to not let the mind wander as you wander, but to become more and more focused and have these different subjects that you know, that perhaps before a walk, just like in a meditation. In other words, this is instead of sitting, or I can't find the word for the moment, but simply when you're in one location, this is an active kind of meditation instead, that can be developed over time, where, of course, as you know, when you start walking somewhere, your body after a while just moves by itself, especially when you know where you're going, and you can start to focus on just one subject. That becomes easier and easier as time progresses to focus on, and anything around it or not connected to it that is a distraction, you can block or just let it dissolve, and after a while in my experience, you'll hear things within yourself and in nature that was blocked or muted by your constant inner monologue. And if you can quiet that, you will become connected to the forest or wherever your walk happens to be. It can be a city too. But you will become more connected with not just the area, but also your inner self, and gain additional knowledge and control over the patterns that you have within yourself or beyond. And that becomes very calming, and that can be a wonderful way to deal with anxiety and depression, and to like naturally meditate and medicate through the meditation away those aspects of your day or night or whenever you happen to be. As I was recording this video, I started to realize that some of the other subjects that I've been requested to cover a bit more in depth started to get into the story, and suddenly the battery was out, and usually I have a backup battery charged, but for some reason it was empty and I couldn't find my other charger, so I had to stop the videos for the day. So that is why this video is a bit different in light, or this part of the video rather is a bit different. Anyway, I think that's an important takeaway when it comes to meditation and wandering. So we can connect that to the self-harm aspect of it. Like I mentioned previously, to me, anxiety or depression doesn't fuel any of my what should we call it, impulses when it comes to self-harm. Rather, it just increases an inability to connect with anything in the material world, and I tend to find myself lost in thought, which makes it possible to do some creative things, but I rather find myself completing any of it. I just keep creating in my own kind of void. But that also connects to some of the cutting, because I don't really get any relief out of it, rather the opposite. That's been something also in my youth. When I started, it was more of a personal journey and exploration and immersion into a kind of discipline. Like I just mentioned, that I tend to lose myself, and even though I'm active in some aspects, in the larger picture and in the moment, I am not really. And then it's also connected to what I would consider to be either failures of my own or an inability to predict or prevent failures of others, or me finding myself connected to those failures or mistakes or other related situations, emotions and moods and so on. So I would incorporate self-harm as a discipline to remind myself to take precautions and learn from the experiences or mistakes that I found myself not necessarily suffering, but experiencing the consequences from. And for me personally, that has been something that works for me. And of course, I wouldn't recommend it to someone just based on that, because for someone else there might be some form of therapy, or you might have a friend or family member that you can talk to. But in my case, I didn't have any of those. And over time, I've had my experiences with therapy and some friends and so on, but for me personally, those things never really helped, and I was declined some of the help that some others got in my circle of friends for no clear reason. Beyond that they claim different substances or medications to be addictive, while they don't really take any actions or precautions against self-medication of, for example, alcohol. Which has been my only legal option. But I know that the relief I get from it is very temporary. Another aspect of the self-harm, in my case, was also partially connected to the general rebellion of youth, to find different social rules or stigmas and finding ways to break them, as well as exceeding my own limits, see how much I can cope with or tolerate, and as well as teaching myself what those moods can take me mentally. And that has been my biggest personal benefit out of it all, that I have many different experiences of pain that I can compare to others, and that makes it easier to cope with both the consequences of different times in my life, and also behaviors from others, with or without relation and connection to the other things I talked about. Because over time, when you start collecting these moods and experiences, it minimizes a lot of the things that the depression and the world and some of the anxiety that it manifests throughout your consciousness. That it's not too bad, and most of all, it's temporary. And like many other things, it is something that you will overcome. And for me, the lack of panic in situations like that has been something that has helped me in many situations in life, both by myself and in social situations. They're not necessarily social, but when I'm traveling or I've been at the different environments through work, where others may experience stress or panic, I can remain calm, because my threshold is incredibly high for many things, while it's unfortunately also low in some other things, especially connected to emotions, and once again especially connected to other people. Because I do well by myself And over many years I have become accustomed to doing things my own way. And that's usually hard to connect to friendships and other forms of relationships. So rather than coping with others' indifference, it's often harder for me to remove myself from my own. As I have a very limited perspective when it comes to time. If I'm not doing something that is measured in time, like for example these videos that I can only do when it's a certain kind of daylight, as well as some different recordings or paintings are limited to a certain kind of light too, either by day or by night, to be at the optimal frequency for manifestation, as different kinds of light or lack of it will amplify that mood and the atmosphere of it. I think that can be a connection found in many things in life from day to day as well. And over the years, I find things like cutting less appealing or necessary, as I have learned what I can from it. But like many other things in life, there is always something new to learn. So I have made it a habit to only implement it into my ceremonies when there is like a true purpose for it. Because there is many habits and other aspects of life that is easy to create excuses for. In my case, drinking, for example. While for some others it may be cutting instead. And I used to share that sentiment in my youth. Because back then it used to be a very integral part in a lot of social interactions, as well as personal meditations and other related rituals to my creative and spiritual practice. So I would say to those still listening to take your time when you're immersing yourself into a ritual and when you're developing a spiritual practice, to always end with an afterthought, or between your ceremonies or rituals, depending on what suits you best, to take a moment to ask yourself the purpose and intent behind the different parts of your ritual or ceremony, what it adds to it, and if it benefits it or not, what you can do to learn more from it, and if you have learned what you can from it, and if it will add anything or not, so that it is not just another habit, but something that adds depth and meaning to your life. That's what I can think of for the moment, connected to what became not just depression and cutting, but also meditation and wandering, which in my case have always been connected. And as always, if you have questions or requests about anything that I have mentioned here, let me know in the comments. I will see what I can think of for the next part in the series. And of course there's always other related subjects that are interesting to dive deeper into. So I will try to do that as well. Thank you for watching and take care.